It started like any other Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, coffee brewed in the kitchen, and my favorite playlist hummed softly in the background. It wasn't anything wild, just a mellow mix of jazz, indie, and the occasional classic rock jam. I had a modest sound system, nothing earth-shattering. I wasn't throwing raves or running a nightclub out of my living room. I was just living. I've always believed that music is a part of a home's heartbeat. For me, it made everything better: cleaning, cooking, reading, working. Even doing taxes didn't feel as painful with a little beat in the background. My neighbors on either side were chill, and over the years, we'd exchanged friendly nods, waves, even shared a few barbecues. No one had ever complained. Not once. So, when the first letter from the HOA arrived, I thought it was a joke. It came in a stiff, overly formal envelope with the association's logo at the top. I remember reading it twice, thinking I must have misunderstood. "Dear homeowner," it began, never my name, always just homeowner. "We have received complaints regarding excessive noise levels coming from your property during non-designated quiet hours." It went on to cite a vague clause about preserving community tranquility, and ended with a warning that future infractions could lead to fines or further action. At first I laughed. Really, I did. Because if playing some Miles Davis at 9 a.m. while cleaning the house was considered a violation of community peace, then we were all doomed. I chalked it up to a misunderstanding. Maybe someone new had moved in. Maybe they were sensitive. I turned the volume down a notch just in case and moved on with my life. But the letters kept coming. Week after week, another envelope. Another warning. Each one slightly more aggressive than the last. They started quoting decibel levels, citing bylaws, threatening legal action. It became a routine: wake up, pour coffee, check the mail, get scolded. What really got under my skin wasn't just the absurdity of it, it was the pettiness. These weren't major noise complaints. I wasn't hosting parties, there weren't any subwoofers shaking the foundation. I even bought a decibel meter app on my phone to check for myself. Standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, the reading was quieter than a passing car. Still, the HOA insisted I was a menace to the neighborhood soundscape. I tried to reason with them. I wrote back, politely at first. I offered to meet, to walk them through my setup, to find some sort of compromise. I asked for evidence, specific complaints, anything that might make this seem like more than a targeted annoyance. Their response? Another form letter. No names, no accountability. Just the same recycled paragraphs and veiled threats. That's when it hit me: this wasn't about noise. Not really. This was about control. The HOA had always been the type to micromanage. I'd seen them go after people for unapproved garden gnomes, mismatched patio furniture, and one poor guy who painted his door a slightly different shade of blue. They weren't a group of concerned neighbors. They were self-appointed tyrants with a rulebook and a clipboard. Music just happened to be my crime. What bothered me most was the silence from the rest of the neighborhood. No one came to me directly. No knock on the door, no "Hey, would you mind turning it down a bit?" It was all done through that faceless HOA machine. I started feeling paranoid, wondering if the people I waved to every morning were secretly the ones filing complaints. Was it the retired couple down the street? The new family next door? The whole vibe of the neighborhood began to shift for me. What once felt like a community started to feel like a cold, quiet surveillance state. I found myself tiptoeing around my own home, checking the volume before playing anything, even at noon. I started wearing headphones more, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. It wasn't just music they were trying to silence. It was me. But I wasn't about to let them win that easily. I started researching. Reading every line of the HOA handbook, digging through local noise ordinances, checking property rights laws. If they were going to turn this into a game, I was going to learn the rules inside and out. What I found was equal parts ridiculous and infuriating. The rules were vague on purpose, broad enough for the HOA to interpret however they wanted, but tight enough to trap anyone who stepped out of line. Still, There was one thing they didn't account for: creativity. If they wanted to treat me like a criminal for enjoying a little background music, fine. But I was going to make sure the next time they tried to silence me, they'd have to work for it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was inspired. An inspiration? That's far louder than any speaker I owned. It wasn't long before the HOA dropped the polite pretense. Their next letter came certified. This one didn't mince words. Your continued disregard for noise ordinances, it read, is disrupting the community vibe we strive to preserve. Disrupting the community vibe, as if I were some kind of musical anarchist trying to bring down the neighborhood one guitar solo at a time. They slapped me with a $150 fine. Just like that. No hearing, no discussion, no chance to defend myself. Apparently, all it took was a couple of complaints, anonymous, of course, for them to throw the book at me. I would have laughed if it didn't make my blood boil. I called their office, hoping to talk to an actual human being. What I got was a voicemail that sounded like it was recorded in 1998. Please leave a message and someone will return your call. No one ever did. After 2 weeks and 3 more fines, I finally managed to reach someone, Diane from the HOA board. Her tone was sharp, clipped, and full of bureaucratic smugness. Yes, Mr. Homeowner, she said, as if using my actual name was beneath her. We've had several reports. You've been playing music at excessive volumes during hours that are not aligned with community guidelines. I asked her what those hours were. She responded with something completely unhelpful like, it's less about the time and more about the impact. The impact, she said. I could almost hear the air quotes around the word. Then she hit me with the kicker. We're trying to foster a peaceful, unified atmosphere. Your choices are not conducive to that. My choices? I wasn't lighting fireworks in the street or revving a dirt bike through the cul-de-sac. I was playing music inside my own home. Music that no reasonable person would ever describe as loud. But apparently, in the HOA's eyes, enjoying anything remotely personal or expressive was now a threat to unity. And suddenly, that was the word they clung to, unity. They started pushing it in newsletters, meeting agendas, even on those cheap little bulletin boards at the entrance to the neighborhood. Preserve the community vibe. Protect our unity. It sounded more like a cult slogan than neighborhood policy. If you squinted, you could almost imagine someone in a suit standing under a giant banner reading Obey. To make things even more ridiculous, I caught wind that they had formed a Community Noise Watch team. I'm not even joking. A bunch of retirees with notebooks and lawn chairs who sat outside trying to catch people in the act of being too lively. One of them even crouched behind my mailbox one afternoon, trying to see if my speakers were pointed out the window. I waved at him. He pretended not to see me. That's when I realized I wasn't just annoying them. I was threatening them. Not physically, of course, but ideologically. I was disrupting their carefully curated world of beige walls, manicured hedges, and forced smiles. My small act of joy, music, was enough to shake the pillars of their fake harmony. And the best part? I was following every rule. I checked the noise ordinances, had my own recordings of volume levels, timestamps, everything. I even had neighbors willing to say they never heard a thing. But none of that mattered. The HOA didn't want the truth. They wanted obedience. And I wasn't giving it to them. Things escalated. They started sending letters not just about the music but about my landscaping. Your hedge is 0.75 inches too high. Seriously? My hedge? Next, it was the trash cans being visible for too long after pickup. Then, a threat that my mailbox might be slightly off-center. It was laughable, until it wasn't. They fined me again. This time, $500. The letter said I was now a repeat offender, and they could begin proceedings to place a lien on my property if I continued to undermine the community values. Undermine the community values. Over some background music and an uneven bush. I'll admit it, there was a moment where I thought about just giving in. Turning off the speakers. keeping my head down, playing their game. But something in me snapped. Not in an angry, destructive way. No, I got focused. Clear. I knew what they feared: expression. Creativity. Something they couldn't control. So I decided to give them the exact thing they hated most, in the most HOA compliant way possible. I spent that weekend sketching, planning, building. I even made a trip to the city office to make sure every inch of my plan was legal. If they wanted quiet compliance, I was going to give them loud legality. That's when the idea hit me: a public library. One they couldn't regulate. But not just any library. A library with sound. Speakers. Massive ones? Dozens of them. Okay, hundreds. I wouldn't blast music anymore. Oh no. That would be too easy. Instead, I'd turn my entire home into an artistic, legally protected sanctuary of literature and sound. A shrine to learning. An experience. One they couldn't shut down without looking like monsters. And the best part? They'd never see it coming. There's a certain kind of madness that's born out of being pushed too far, not the dangerous kind, but the creative. You messed with the wrong person. Kind. That's where I was when the $500 fine hit my mailbox. Not angry. Not sad. Just done. Done playing nice. Done pretending logic would work. Done trying to reason with people who saw themselves as dictators of suburban sameness. So I did the one thing no HOA handbook could have predicted. I turned my house into a public library. You see, according to our city's bylaws, if a property is being used as a nonprofit public resource, such as a library, it falls under a different set of municipal rules. That includes, interestingly enough, permission for ambient audio systems to enhance educational or artistic experiences. I double-checked it with a friend who worked in local government. As long as I wasn't charging money, blasting obscene content, or violating specific decibel laws, which I wasn't, I could set up as many speakers as I wanted, and run them all day long. So that's exactly what I did. The next few weeks were a blur of planning, building, and collecting. I transformed the entire front room of my house into a reading space, complete with shelves, tables, and even a homemade checkout counter. I bought used books in bulk from local thrift shops, filled the shelves with everything from cookbooks to mystery novels to DIY manuals. Then came the sound system. I ordered speakers in batches, Bluetooth, wired, standing, wall-mounted. Some came from online deals, others from garage sales, and a few from an audio enthusiast forum I joined just for this ridiculous mission. I didn't care if they matched. I didn't care if some of them buzzed. I just cared that they worked. When the dust settled, I had over 200 speakers wired through my house. I hid some behind plants, nestled others in bookshelves, mounted them on the ceiling, stuck them under tables, and even put a few in my mailbox just for flair. And they all played the same thing: calm, peaceful library ambience, soft instrumental music, the occasional page turn, and quiet whispers. A custom 10-hour loop, created just for this petty masterpiece. It was hilarious and beautiful. Like stepping into a cathedral of literature and passive-aggressive vengeance. And it was all legal. I filed for a community resource listing with the city. Set up a small website for the library, with open hours. Even posted a QR code sign outside with a catalog of available books. And right on my front lawn, I installed a wooden sign. The Page Turner Public Library, a sanctuary of sound and story. With one simple signature from City Hall, my home was no longer a private residence with noise violations. It was a registered educational resource, complete with ambience to match. The next HOA meeting was the stuff of legends. I didn't even go in. I just sat in a lawn chair across the street with a cup of tea and a Bluetooth speaker playing faint, classical music, just loud enough for them to hear. About 20 minutes into their session, one of the board members stormed outside and glared at me. "Are you mocking us?" "No," I said, grinning. "I'm reading." A few days later, Diane, the same woman who lectured me over the phone, showed up at my doorstep. She didn't even knock, just stood there like some kind of suburban villain. "What is this?" she demanded, waving her clipboard like it was a badge. "A library," I said, gesturing inside. "Would you like to check something out? We've got a pretty solid mystery section." Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the books, the setup, and the soft, whispery ambience playing from a dozen speakers. "This is ridiculous. This is art," I said, dead serious. She tried to cite the same community guidelines, but I was ready. I handed her a copy of the municipal code, highlighted and bookmarked, with a sticky note on the page titled, "Ambient Sound in Public Resources." She didn't even take it. Instead, she left, but I could feel it. The war had shifted. Suddenly, the HOA didn't have the upper hand. For the first time, they looked rattled. And I reveled in it. The next week, something wild happened. A family came by and actually used the library. They walked in, browsed the shelves, and the father said, "I heard about this online. My buddy said this place is real." They signed out a few cookbooks, took a selfie in front of the library sign, and left with big grins. That one moment felt better than any fine they could have ever hit me with. But that moment also lit a fire under the HOA's feet. They doubled down. First came the emails. Operating a business without HOA approval. Except I wasn't charging anyone, so that fell flat. Then they tried to enforce signage violations. I replaced my hand-painted sign with a smaller, approved one, and then projected the name of the library on my garage door at night using a silent LED projector. That really sent them spinning. Finally, they brought out the big guns. Legal threats. A cease and desist letter claiming I was weaponizing municipal codes to antagonize the community. No joke, weaponizing codes. It was the most dramatic piece of HOA fiction I'd ever read. But I knew what this was. They weren't trying to protect the community anymore. They were trying to silence me, not the noise, me. My creativity. My expression. My refusal to fold. And that's when I realized this was never about rules. It was about control. I had broken no laws. I had complied with every ridiculous rule they threw at me. I turned the system against them without breaking a sweat. But now, they were coming harder than ever, not because I was wrong, but because I'd proven they could be beaten at their own game. So I did what I always do when things get tense. I turned up the ambience, just a little, and added wind chimes made out of hollowed-out encyclopedias on the porch, because why not? I had about one glorious week of peace, well, my kind of peace. The Page-Turner Public Library was running like clockwork. A couple of teenagers wandered in after school and flipped through graphic novels. An older neighbor donated an entire box of National Geographics. And all the while, the warm hum of classical piano and turning pages wrapped the house in a cozy sonic bubble. But then the HOA struck back. And this time, they didn't come with warnings. They came with war. It started when I received a certified letter, hand-delivered by a security guard hired by the HOA. That's right. These people were so threatened by a guy with books and Bluetooth speakers that they brought in private security to do their dirty work. The letter, stamped with the HOA's shiny gold logo, was a masterpiece of paranoia. It accused me of operating a disruptive installation under the false pretense of a nonprofit, and demanded that I cease all auditory emissions exceeding 45 decibels during daylight hours. That number was interesting, because according to city code, I was allowed up to 55 decibels, and I had a sound meter to prove I never went above 50. But they didn't care about proof. They were trying to rewrite the rules. They called an emergency meeting. Not a regular HOA board meeting, a full-blown community town hall. They posted signs at the neighborhood entrance, emailed every resident, and even walked around taping flyers to mailboxes that said, "Urgent discussion of local disruptions threatening our neighborhood harmony." They didn't mention me by name, but who else could it be? Out of pure curiosity, and maybe a touch of spite, I attended the meeting. They held it at the clubhouse. The room was packed. I took a seat in the back corner, hoodie on, earbuds in. Ironically, I was listening to a soundtrack called Peaceful library ambience with gentle wind chimes. When Diane walked to the front of the room, she looked like a villain straight out of a suburban drama. Clipboard, glasses, a forced smile stretched across her face like plastic wrap. "We're here tonight," she began, "because our shared community values are under threat." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "We've received numerous complaints about, well, a certain resident, who has exploited municipal loopholes to install an excessive number of speakers under the guise of public enrichment." I raised an eyebrow. "Loopholes? That's one way to describe following the law better than your enemies." She went on, painting me like some unhinged rebel, a menace turning our peaceful neighborhood into a sonic experiment. And then she did something I'll never forget. She pulled out a printed map of my property with red X's marked all over it. "According to reports," she said, "there are at least 200 individual audio emitters installed. This is unacceptable. This is an invasion of communal peace." A man raised his hand. "Has he broken any actual rules?" Diane hesitated. "Well, not yet. But we are proposing an emergency revision to the HOA guidelines to prohibit any residents from utilizing more than 6 sound devices at one time." That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said loud enough for the whole room. "Is there a sound device limit on holiday decorations? What about those 12-foot Halloween skeletons? What about those houses that sync their Christmas lights to radio stations? Because I'm pretty sure I've seen more than 6 speakers during December." The room went silent. Diane narrowed her eyes at me. "This isn't about holidays. This is about you." "Exactly." They'd stopped pretending. They weren't hiding behind rules anymore. It was personal. I left the meeting before it ended. But the damage was done. The next day, I got hit with a brand new violation notice. Unauthorized structure on property. They were talking about my bookshelf. The same one I'd placed outside on the porch for a free "take a book, leave a book" setup. They claimed it was a fixture that violated the uniform aesthetic policy. Apparently, dark oak didn't match the community color palette. Unbelievable. I moved the bookshelf inside and replaced it with a gray metal cart, just to mock them. I labeled it "Aesthetically Neutral Mobile Book Unit." Still wasn't enough. They started sending daily citations, one about a small crack in my sidewalk, which had been there for years, another claiming the wind chimes hanging on my porch were distracting. The wind chimes were made out of paperback novels, for crying out loud. Then came the unannounced inspections. One morning I opened my curtains to find a clipboard-wielding woman and a guy with a noise meter crouched behind my hedges. I stepped outside and gave them a cheerful wave. "Checking the volume on some good literature?" I asked. They didn't answer. Just scribbled notes and left. The stress began to pile up. It wasn't just the HOA anymore. It was a siege. Every day brought a new complaint. Every response I filed felt like screaming into a void. They were playing the long game, hoping to drown me in paperwork, fees, and frustration. I could have shut it all down. Pulled the plug. Silenced the speakers. Repainted everything beige and fallen in line. But I didn't. Because at that point, it wasn't just about the music, or the books, or even the speakers. It was about the principle. I wasn't disturbing the neighborhood. I was disturbing their control. Their illusion of power. And they hated it. So I doubled down. I added a new reading section near the mailbox. Short stories laminated and clipped to a community corkboard. I played soft author interviews through hidden speakers in my flower beds. I installed a motion sensor that triggered a gentle audiobook sample when someone walked past. And through it all, I stayed calm. Smiling. Cordial. Impossibly polite. Because nothing infuriates a tyrant like someone who plays by the rules and still wins. But I could feel the end approaching. The HOA was getting desperate. They were rallying the board, working with lawyers, and preparing to escalate the situation beyond the neighborhood. It was only a matter of time before this suburban showdown turned into something bigger. But whatever they had planned next, I'd be ready. I had one more chapter left in this story. I remember the day the final letter arrived like it was yesterday. The envelope was thick, lawyer thick. No cheery neighborhood bulletin or colorful seasonal stamp this time. Just cold, white paper with a gold embossed HOA seal, like something out of a dystopian novel. It wasn't a violation notice. It wasn't a warning. It was an ultimatum. Cease all unauthorized public operations, or face legal action. They were suing me. According to them, my so-called library was a nuisance operation, exploiting zoning technicalities. They claimed I was disrupting community peace, encouraging traffic, and my favorite, creating an antagonistic environment via performative compliance. Performative compliance. I laughed when I read that. Because they were right. I had followed every rule, down to the word, but with a message woven in every decibel: you don't control me. And that drove them nuts. I knew I could fight it. I had a case. City bylaws were on my side. My speakers weren't breaking noise ordinances, and the library had been properly registered as a free community resource. But here's the truth they were counting on: legal battles aren't always about right or wrong. They're about endurance. Time. Money. Stress. And I was tired. Tired of the daily citations, tired of the HOA board meetings where I was the villain in every PowerPoint slide, tired of the neighbors who looked at me like I was some kind of suburban anarchist. This wasn't a victory I could sustain forever. I was creative, not invincible. So I made a choice. I shut it all down. One by one, I powered off every speaker. The once vibrant ambience, pages turning, violins humming, wind chimes dancing with the air, faded into silence. I packed away the books, removed the shelves, took down the corkboard. The sign on the lawn came down last. I held it for a long time before finally tucking it into the garage. It was over. At least the noise was. The next day, Diane strutted past my house like she had just won a war. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, not even pretending to hide the smugness. For her and the rest of the HOA board, this was the ending they'd worked so hard for. Silence. Compliance. Control. And on paper they won. No more sound. No more library. No more threat to their iron grip on neighborhood order. But here's what they didn't understand. You can kill the noise, but you can't kill the idea. People remembered. Neighbors I'd never spoken to started stopping by, not to complain, but to say thank you. One guy brought over a six-pack and said, "I never had the guts to stand up to them. You did." That meant something. A teenager from down the block left a sticky note on my door. "Your library was the coolest thing this street's ever had." Even a few former HOA members, ones who had quietly resigned during the chaos, messaged me privately to say they admired what I did. That I made them realize just how far things had gone. And then something unexpected happened. The ambience started to return. Not from me. From others. It started with a kid setting up a little book swap box in his front yard, an old shoebox with 3 paperbacks and a sign that said, "Take one, leave one." Then a family down the street started playing soft jazz from a speaker in their backyard on weekends. A week later, another house put up wind chimes, big, colorful ones that clinked like a xylophone. HOA sent them a warning. They ignored it. I'd started something. A quiet rebellion. Sure, the HOA still had their rules. Their power. Their gold letterhead threats. But the neighborhood wasn't the same anymore. Because now, people had seen the cracks. They'd seen what control looked like. They'd seen what resistance could be. And even in silence, that echo doesn't fade. As for me, I didn't stop creating. I just shifted mediums. I turned one of the back rooms into a soundproof studio. No more outdoor ambience. No more rules to bend. Just me, my mic, and a new podcast I launched. Neighborhood Noise, Stories from the Suburbs. First episode? How I built a library to piss off the HOA. It blew up. Turns out, people everywhere had their own stories. Ridiculous HOA run-ins, power-tripping board members, bizarre fines for non-regulation curtains, or too many potted plants. I gave them a place to be heard. And just like that, my voice found a louder platform than any speaker system ever could. The HOA still doesn't know about the podcast. I don't need them to. Because this time, I'm not in their jurisdiction. I'm in everyone's. I still walk past the place where the library sign used to be. Sometimes I miss it, the sound, the books, the quiet war I fought in plain sight. But I don't regret ending it. Because I didn't lose. I adapted. I outlasted. They stood tall, sure. But only in the rulebook. Me? I stood taller, in the hearts of the people who remembered the fight. Who still share my story. Who refused to let creativity be silenced by control. They shut down the speakers. But they couldn't silence the spirit. And that's the part they'll never understand.